Have you ever wondered why some people remain calm even when everything around them is falling apart? Imagine receiving terrible news before breakfast. Your closest friend has betrayed you. Your business is failing. Your family is worried. Your health is getting worse. Most of us would panic. We would blame the world. We would ask, why is this happening to me? But nearly 2,000 years ago, one man faced problems far greater than most of us could ever imagine. He ruled an empire stretching across 3 continents. Millions of lives depended on his decisions. His armies were constantly at war. Disease swept through his cities. Political enemies waited patiently for him to fail. Every mistake could cost thousands of lives. And yet, instead of writing speeches about power, instead of celebrating his victories, instead of recording the glory of Rome, he filled a notebook with quiet reminders to himself. Not for the public, not for history, not for fame, just for himself. That notebook would later become one of the most influential books ever written. A book called Meditations. What's fascinating is that Marcus Aurelius never intended anyone to read it. There was no publisher, no audience, no bestseller list. These pages were simply conversations with himself, private thoughts, gentle corrections, small reminders written late at night after long days of ruling the largest empire on earth. Perhaps that's why they still feel so honest today. Because they were never written to impress anyone. They were written to survive another difficult day. And maybe that's why this book continues to resonate after nearly 2,000 years. Because although the world has changed, human nature has not. We still worry. We still compare ourselves to others. We still become frustrated when life refuses to follow our plans. Technology has changed. Cities have changed. The speed of life has changed. But the human mind still struggles with many of the same battles Marcus faced. Before we explore his ideas, it's worth asking another question. How does a man become calm enough to write words that people are still reading after 20 centuries? The answer begins long before he became emperor. Marcus Aurelius was born in the year 121 in Rome. From the outside, his life appeared fortunate. He belonged to a respected family. He received an excellent education. He grew up surrounded by wealth and opportunity. It would have been easy for him to believe the world existed to serve him. Instead, his teachers encouraged something unusual. They taught him philosophy, not as an academic subject, but as a way of living. Among the many schools of philosophy in ancient Greece and Rome, one stood above the rest in Marcus's mind: Stoicism. Today, people often misunderstand that word. Some imagine it means suppressing emotions. Others think it means becoming cold or indifferent. But that isn't what Stoicism originally meant. Stoicism asks a much simpler question. What is actually within your control? Think about your own day. Can you control the weather? No. Can you control traffic? Not really. Can you control what strangers say about you online? Of course not. Can you control whether someone appreciates your kindness? Again, no. Yet how much of our mental energy is spent trying to control precisely these things? Marcus realized something remarkable. The more we fight reality, the more reality fights back. This became one of the foundations of his life, not because life became easier, but because his attention became clearer. Then something unexpected happened. Marcus wasn't born expecting to become emperor. In fact, the chances were surprisingly small. The Roman Empire didn't always pass power from father to son. Instead, emperors often adopted the person they believed was best suited to rule. Imagine learning that one day, your entire future had changed, that millions of people might depend on your wisdom, that every decision would carry enormous consequences. Most people would become excited, others might become terrified. Marcus did something different. He prepared, not by learning how to command armies, not by collecting wealth, not by chasing popularity. He trained his own character, because he believed that before leading others, you must first learn to lead yourself. That idea sounds beautiful. But history would soon test it in ways no classroom ever could. As emperor, Marcus faced challenge after challenge. Wars erupted along Rome's northern borders. Germanic tribes pushed against the empire. Resources became scarce. Then came one of the deadliest pandemics of the ancient world. Historians now call it the Antonine Plague. It spread rapidly across the empire, killing countless people. Some estimates suggest millions died. Imagine leading a nation during a devastating pandemic. Hospitals overwhelmed, families grieving, fear spreading faster than facts. For many of us, that image feels strangely familiar. Although centuries separate us, recent history reminds us how quickly uncertainty can reshape everyday life. Marcus had every reason to despair. Instead, he returned to the same notebook, page after page, thought after thought, not asking, "Why me?" but asking, "How should I respond?" That small difference changes everything, because one question searches for blame, the other searches for wisdom. Here's the first great lesson from Meditations. Big idea. One, you cannot control what happens, but you can control who you become. At first, this sounds almost too simple. Of course, we can't control everything. Everyone knows that. But knowing something and living it are very different things. Imagine standing on a beach. A wave rushes toward you. Would you try to stop the ocean? Probably not. You would adjust your footing, maybe step back, maybe move with the water instead of against it. Life often behaves the same way. Unexpected events are like waves. They arrive whether we invite them or not. Losing a job, a disappointing exam, a sudden illness, a broken relationship. None of these ask for permission before appearing. Our suffering often begins when we insist, "This shouldn't be happening." Marcus gently reminds himself otherwise. Reality doesn't ask what we prefer. Reality simply is. Our freedom begins when we decide how to meet it. There's a story about two stonecutters. A traveler asked the first, "What are you doing?" The man sighed, "I'm breaking rocks all day." The traveler asked the second the same question. He smiled, "I'm building a cathedral." Both men performed exactly the same work. The difference wasn't in their circumstances, it was in their perspective. Marcus understood this deeply. The events of life matter, but the meaning we give them matters even more. This doesn't mean pretending painful things aren't painful. If someone you love becomes ill, that hurts. If your dream falls apart, that hurts. Stoicism never asks us to deny reality. Instead, it asks us to stop adding unnecessary suffering on top of unavoidable pain. Pain says, "This happened." The mind often adds, "It should never have happened. I'll never recover. My life is ruined." Those extra stories become heavier than the event itself. Marcus spent years practicing a different habit. Whenever difficulty appeared, he silently asked, "What part of this is actually mine to control?" Sometimes the answer was surprisingly small. His effort, his honesty, his patience, his courage, and strangely, those small things were enough. Because although he couldn't command the world, he could still command himself. Perhaps that's why Meditations doesn't read like the diary of an emperor. It reads like the journal of someone trying every single day to become a slightly better human being. And maybe that's a goal worth pursuing, no matter where we live, what we own, or what title we carry. Because the greatest empire any of us will ever rule is the one inside our own minds. If Marcus Aurelius had lived today, many people would probably admire his success before they understood his philosophy. They would see the emperor, the armies, the palaces, the power, and they might assume that this was the secret to his peace. But Marcus believed something almost completely opposite. He believed that external success could never guarantee inner peace, because no matter how much power you possess, your own mind can still become your greatest enemy. Imagine standing in a crowded room. Everyone seems happy. People are laughing, talking, celebrating. Yet somewhere in the corner stands a man who cannot stop worrying. Nothing terrible has happened. No one is threatening him. No disaster is unfolding. And yet, inside his own thoughts, he is fighting a battle no one else can see. Marcus understood that battle. He knew that the loudest conflicts often happen in complete silence. The Roman Empire stretched across continents. But the hardest territory for Marcus to govern was never Rome. It was his own mind. That realization leads us to the second great idea hidden throughout Meditations. Your mind creates more suffering than reality. Just think back to the last time something upset you. Perhaps someone ignored your message. Perhaps a colleague criticized your work. Perhaps someone spoke harshly to you. Now ask yourself a simple question. What hurt more, the event itself, or the story your mind created afterward? One sentence becomes, "They don't respect me." One mistake becomes, "I'm a failure." One disagreement becomes, "They've always hated me." Our minds are remarkable storytellers. Unfortunately, they often write tragedies before the facts have even arrived. Marcus noticed this tendency long before psychologists gave it names like catastrophizing or cognitive distortion. He simply observed that human beings suffer twice. First, because something happens. Second, because we keep replaying it. Imagine dropping your phone. The screen cracks. That's unfortunate. But then the mind begins. I'm so stupid. This always happens to me. My whole week is ruined. What if I can't afford a new one? One cracked screen becomes an emotional avalanche. Marcus gently reminds himself to separate facts from interpretations. The fact is simple. The screen cracked. Everything else is a story. And stories can be rewritten. There's an old tale about a farmer whose horse ran away. His neighbors rushed over. What terrible luck. The farmer simply replied, "Maybe." A few days later, the horse returned, bringing several wild horses with it. The neighbors smiled. What wonderful luck. Again, the farmer answered, "Maybe." Soon after, the farmer's son tried riding one of the wild horses. He fell. His leg broke. Again. The neighbors declared it terrible luck. The farmer said only, "Maybe." Then war broke out. Every healthy young man in the village was taken to fight. The farmer's injured son stayed home. The story reminds us that life rarely reveals its meaning immediately. What feels like disaster today may quietly become tomorrow's blessing. Marcus lived through enough hardship to understand this. He learned that reacting too quickly often blinds us to the larger picture. How often have you worried about something, only to discover months later that it led you somewhere better? A missed opportunity, a failed interview, a relationship that ended. At the time, each felt devastating. Looking back, they became turning points. Marcus trained himself not to rush toward judgment. Instead of asking, "Is this good or bad?" he asked, How should I meet this moment? There is remarkable freedom in that question because it removes the impossible burden of predicting the future. None of us can. We only have this moment and our response to it. History gives us another remarkable example. During one military campaign, Marcus spent years far from the luxury of Rome. His palace became a military tent. His companions were soldiers. The weather was harsh, supplies were uncertain. He slept little, faced constant danger. And still, this was where many of the reflections and meditations were written. Think about that for a moment. These weren't ideas produced in comfort. They were forged under pressure. Perhaps that is why they continue to resonate, because wisdom that survives hardship tends to survive history. Marcus wasn't asking, how do I avoid difficulty? He was asking, who do I become because of difficulty? That is a completely different way of living. Suppose tomorrow begins badly. You wake up late, the train is delayed, someone criticizes your work, rain ruins your plans. Nothing extraordinary, just one of those frustrating days. How much of that day will be determined by those events? And how much will be determined by the conversations inside your own head? Marcus would probably smile gently and remind us that while we rarely choose the weather, we choose whether to carry the storm inside us. There's a question that Marcus Aurelius quietly asks throughout meditations, although he never asks it directly. If today were your last ordinary day, would you even recognize it? Not your last dramatic day, not a day filled with celebration or tragedy, just an ordinary Tuesday, a morning cup of coffee, a short conversation with someone you love, the walk to work, the familiar streets, the routine you've repeated hundreds of times before. Most of us live as though these moments will always return. Marcus knew better. As emperor, he watched soldiers leave for battles from which many would never return. He watched children grow into adults. He watched trusted advisors grow old. He buried friends. He buried family. He ruled through plague, war, and uncertainty. Death was not an abstract idea. It was part of his daily reality. Yet surprisingly, Meditations is not a book about fearing death. It is a book about remembering life. Marcus wasn't obsessed with how life ends. He was concerned with how we spend the time before it does. That brings us to the fourth great idea. Time is more valuable than money. Imagine someone offered you $10 million. There's only one condition. Tomorrow never comes. No sunrise, no breakfast, no conversation with the people you love, no chance to laugh again, no opportunity to begin again. No amount of money could make that trade worthwhile. Yet every day we quietly exchange pieces of our lives for things that matter far less. We postpone conversations, delay dreams, wait for the right time. We tell ourselves, I'll start next year. I'll call them later. I'll travel when work becomes less busy. I'll slow down after this project. But life has a habit of continuing while we're busy making plans. Marcus often reminded himself that each morning was a gift, not a guarantee, not to create anxiety, but gratitude. There's a profound difference between waking up because you have to and waking up because you get to. Perhaps you've experienced this before. Think back to a difficult period in your life. Maybe you were overwhelmed with exams. Maybe work consumed every waking hour. Maybe you were caring for someone who was ill. During those days, ordinary moments probably felt insignificant. A quiet breakfast, a peaceful walk, an uninterrupted afternoon. Yet, after that difficult season passed, those simple moments suddenly became precious. Nothing about the moments had changed. Only your awareness had. Marcus wanted that awareness every single day. not after hardship, not after loss, now. He believed that each morning offered us a choice. We could drift through another day on autopilot, or we could remember that time is the one resource no emperor, no billionaire, and no genius can create more of. History offers an extraordinary example. When Marcus traveled with his armies, there were nights when he could have celebrated victories. Instead, he chose to write, not speeches, not commands, not records of conquest, personal reflections. Imagine that scene. A quiet military camp, the sounds of distant conversations fading into the night, a single oil lamp flickering inside a simple tent. Outside, thousands of soldiers rested before another uncertain day. Inside, the most powerful man in the known world was reminding himself to be kinder, more patient, more grateful, more disciplined. Power had not convinced Marcus that he was above self-improvement. It convinced him that he needed it even more. Perhaps that's one reason his words still endure, because they were written by someone who understood that every title eventually disappears, every empire eventually fades, every monument eventually crumbles. But character, that remains long after success has been forgotten. There's an old story about a traveler who asked 3 workers what they were doing. The first answered, "I'm laying bricks." The second replied, "I'm earning a living." The third smiled and said, "I'm building something that will outlive me." All 3 performed the same task. Only one understood the deeper purpose. Marcus believed our days work the same way. Every ordinary choice is another brick. The question is, what are we building? Not with our careers, not with our possessions, but with ourselves. Imagine looking back on your life many years from now. Which moments will matter? Will it be the extra hours spent worrying? The argument you refuse to let go? The endless comparison with someone else's success? Or will it be the quiet dinner with family, the unexpected conversation with a friend, the courage to begin something new? Marcus gently encourages us to spend our days as though they are shaping the person we are becoming, because they are, every single one. Big idea 5. The greatest victory is over yourself. When we hear the word victory, most of us picture someone standing on a podium, a championship trophy, a successful business, a promotion, recognition, applause. Marcus Aurelius had experienced all of those things. He had commanded armies, won military campaigns, ruled the most powerful empire of his age. History remembers him as one of Rome's greatest emperors. Yet, if you read Meditations carefully, something remarkable becomes clear. Marcus rarely celebrated those achievements. Instead, he worried about losing a far more important battle, the battle against his own ego. Imagine climbing a mountain. The higher you climb, the wider your view becomes, but the higher you climb, the stronger the wind also becomes. Success works much the same way. Achievement brings opportunities. It also brings pride, praise, comfort, the temptation to believe you are somehow different from everyone else. Marcus fought that temptation every day. He constantly reminded himself that fame fades, power changes hands, public opinion shifts like the wind. A person celebrated today may be forgotten tomorrow. If your happiness depends entirely on admiration, your peace depends on something you cannot control. History gives us a striking contrast. Marcus Aurelius and another Roman emperor, Nero, both ruled Rome. Both possessed unimaginable wealth. Both held absolute power. Yet history remembers them very differently. Nero became consumed by vanity, fear, and cruelty. He demanded admiration, silenced critics, placed his own importance above the well-being of others. Marcus, decades later, wrote private reminders urging himself to remain humble. One emperor asked, "How can the world admire me?" The other quietly asked, "How can I become a better man?" The difference between those questions shaped two very different legacies. Marcus understood that our greatest opponent rarely lives outside us. It lives within us. The desire to always be right, the urge to compare, the fear of failure, the hunger for approval. These invisible opponents follow us wherever we go. Changing cities won't remove them. Changing jobs won't remove them. Even becoming emperor won't remove them. Only self-awareness can. Imagine carrying a glass of water. If you hold it for 10 seconds, it feels light. For 10 minutes, your arm begins to ache. For several hours, it becomes unbearable. The weight never changed. Your relationship with it did. Marcus believed many of our emotional burdens work exactly the same way. A criticism heard in the morning can occupy our thoughts until midnight, not because it became heavier, because we kept carrying it. He quietly asks us, what would happen if you simply put the glass down? What if not every insult deserved your attention? What if not every disagreement required your response? What if your peace became more valuable than winning? There is another story from ancient Greece. A philosopher was once publicly insulted by a man in the marketplace. The crowd waited for his reaction. He smiled, then continued walking. Someone asked, "Why didn't you defend yourself?" The philosopher replied, "If someone hands you a gift and you choose not to accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" The answer was obvious. It remains with the person who offered it. So it is with insults, the philosopher said. Marcus lived by a similar principle. He understood that another person's anger does not have to become your own. You always have a choice, not over what they say, but over what you carry forward. Perhaps this is why meditations has survived for nearly 2,000 years. It doesn't promise a life without difficulty. It offers something far more realistic, the possibility of becoming someone who remains steady despite difficulty. Not perfect, not fearless, not emotionless, simply steady. Like an old oak tree standing through countless seasons. Storms come, leaves fall, winters arrive, spring returns. The tree cannot stop the weather, but it can deepen its roots. Marcus spent his life deepening those roots, and perhaps that is the quiet invitation he leaves for each of us. Not to become an emperor, not to seek greatness in the eyes of history, but to become the kind of person who can meet whatever life brings with wisdom, courage, and grace. Because in the end, the person we become is the only achievement we truly keep. Let's return to the question we began with. Why do some people remain calm, even when everything around them seems to be falling apart? When we first asked that question, it probably sounded like a mystery. Perhaps you imagined someone who had discovered a secret, someone with extraordinary discipline, or someone who simply felt less fear than everyone else. But after walking through the life of Marcus Aurelius, the answer feels different. Calmness was never a gift he was born with. It was something he practiced again and again and again. Every difficult conversation became another lesson. Every disappointment became another opportunity to strengthen his character. Every uncertain day became another page in a notebook that no one else was ever supposed to read. There's something strangely comforting about that. One of history's greatest rulers still doubted himself, still became frustrated, still needed reminders. He didn't write because he had mastered life. He wrote because he was still learning how to live it. Perhaps that's why Meditations feels so timeless. It isn't a book written from the top of a mountain. It's a book written while climbing one. And maybe that's exactly where most of us are. Still climbing, still trying, still learning. Think about the 5 ideas we've explored together. First, Marcus reminds us that we cannot control what happens to us, but we can always choose the kind of person we become in response. The world may not always be fair. Life may not always be kind, but our character is still ours to shape. Second, he reminds us that our minds often create more suffering than reality itself. How many hours have we spent replaying conversations that can no longer be changed? How many nights have we sacrificed to worries that never became reality? Marcus invites us to notice the stories we tell ourselves and to ask whether they are helping us or simply exhausting us. Third, he reminds us that difficult people are not interruptions to life. They are part of life. Just as winter brings cold and the sea brings waves, human beings bring imperfections. When we stop expecting perfection from others, we create more space for patience and perhaps for kindness. Fourth, Marcus reminds us that time is the only treasure every person receives in equal measure. The richest person alive cannot purchase one additional yesterday. The poorest person alive still wakes up with 24 fresh hours. The question has never been how much time we have. The question is what we quietly do with it. And finally, Marcus teaches us that the greatest victory is never over another person. It is over ourselves, our anger, our pride, our fear, our need to always be right. These are the battles that determine the quality of a life, not because they are dramatic, but because they happen every single day. Imagine, for a moment, that Marcus Aurelius could walk through one of our modern cities. He would see towering skyscrapers, cars moving faster than any horse could gallop, people carrying devices capable of answering almost any question within seconds. He would probably be amazed. But I also wonder what would surprise him even more. Perhaps it would be how familiar our struggles still are. We still worry about what other people think. We still compare our lives to those around us. We still become impatient when things don't go our way. We still postpone happiness until some future milestone. In many ways, our tools have changed. Our hearts have not. And that is why a man writing by the light of an oil lamp nearly 2,000 years ago can still speak so clearly to someone sitting in a modern apartment, riding a train, or walking through a crowded city. Because wisdom is not measured by its age. It is measured by its truth. There is a beautiful Japanese practice called kintsugi. When a ceramic bowl breaks, it isn't thrown away. The cracks are repaired with gold. The break becomes part of the object's story, not something to hide, something to honor. Marcus Aurelius would have understood this. He never asked for a life without cracks. He asked for the strength to grow through them. Perhaps our own lives are meant to be the same. Perhaps our failures, our disappointments, our losses are not evidence that life has gone wrong. Perhaps they are the places where wisdom quietly begins. There is another story I'd like to leave you with. Imagine an old gardener planting an oak tree. A young child watches with curiosity and asks, "Why are you planting that tree? It won't be fully grown for decades." The gardener smiles. "I know. Then why plant it?" because someone planted one for me. Marcus Aurelius never knew his private journal would become one of the most influential books in history. He wasn't trying to become famous. He wasn't trying to build a legacy. He was simply planting trees, one reflection at a time, one honest thought after another. And nearly 2,000 years later, we are resting in their shade. That, perhaps, is one of the most beautiful lessons of all. The greatest contributions often begin quietly, without applause, without recognition, without certainty that anyone will ever notice. A kind word, a patient response, a difficult decision made with integrity, a habit practiced consistently. These things rarely make headlines, yet over the course of a lifetime, they become the architecture of character. Before we part, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. Imagine waking tomorrow morning. Nothing extraordinary has happened. The world looks exactly the same. Your responsibilities haven't disappeared. Your inbox is still waiting. Traffic still exists. The difficult conversation you have been avoiding may still need to happen. Outwardly, very little has changed, but perhaps something inside you has. Perhaps when frustration appears, you'll pause before reacting. Perhaps when something doesn't go according to plan, you'll remember that your response is still your own. Perhaps when time seems to slip through your fingers, you'll choose to spend a little more of it on what truly matters. If that happens, even once, then Marcus Aurelius has done what he hoped his journal would do. Not change the world, but help one person meet the world with a little more wisdom. And maybe that is enough, because history is rarely transformed by one dramatic moment. More often, it changes because ordinary people quietly choose to become slightly better than they were yesterday. Marcus Aurelius never asked us to become fearless. He never asked us to become perfect. He simply reminded us that every sunrise offers another opportunity to practice, to be a little more patient, a little more grateful, a little more courageous, a little more compassionate. And if we continue practicing, day after day, year after year, we may discover something remarkable. The peace we have been searching for was never waiting somewhere beyond success, wealth, or recognition. It was quietly growing within us all along.